I see Dave. That must mean it's time to start the show.
That's it. Ready to rock and roll.
Well, I learned from the last show that apparently you're allowed to have a beer on live TV. I did not know that, so we'll work that in next time. But let's kick this off. It's Friday, it's lunchtime, and it's time for your weekly dose of Future Law Bootcamp. I'm your host, Joe Borstein, CEO of LexFusion and certified total freak about legal innovation. On Future Law, we discuss the tectonic forces bubbling under the surface of the $800+ billion legal industry. Forces like globalization, which is allowing lawyers to work with other professionals all over the globe. Technology, which is not only automating routine processes, but is relentlessly climbing up the value chain and dabbling in more and more sophisticated legal tasks. We talk about the regulation, which is being questioned and changed to allow businesses and technical professionals to work alongside lawyers and solve legal problems at scale. And of course, the money. Through SPACs, VC funds, and litigation funding, investors are seeing opportunity to make a broken system dramatically better. Futurist Peter Diamandis likes to say, if you want to make $1 billion, try to figure out how to help 1 billion people. And that stuck with me. Law affects everyone on the planet. There's a lot of people to help, a lot of money to be made. So whatever drives you personally, idealism, greed, or even just excitement, we ask that all lawyers pay a little attention to what's going on in the legal innovation space, and you might just find your purpose here. Today, I have a special guest, a good friend of mine, Dave Curran. We're going to talk today about sustainability, environmental, and social governance, known as ESG. But we're also going to talk to Dave about his long history, and that's not an old joke, his deep history in legal innovation, where he has pioneered many different things, both from the practice of law side and the business of law side. It's a pretty impressive background. I think will be exciting for all our listeners. Let me just give you a little background on Dave. Dave is the Chief Sustainability, the ESG Officer at Paul Weiss. In this role, he has dual responsibilities. He has to work with the lawyers to lead the practice and also promote the firm's internal ESG practices. He is an absolute recognized leader in helping complex organizations build resilience. He runs some of the most phenomenal thought leadership programs I've ever been involved with. We're going to talk about that a little bit. He brings some of the most interesting speakers into the room, closed doors, to talk about what's really on their minds. And he was a media trial and appellate lawyer before moving to senior in-house positions. We're going to talk about that a lot more too. With that, welcome Dave Curran. And he's on mute.
Unmute. Nice cue. Thanks, Joe. Great to have time with you and to join this really cool live streaming. You've been very generous in your introduction, so I'm hopefully we'll live up to an eighth of it. But really excited, and this is really cool, and I'm glad to join the fun.
You have 28 more minutes to just blow them away, so you got it. So I wanted to start off with this. So I think for a lot of young lawyers and even lawyers mid-career, there's this feeling that the time has passed for them to do new things. I would like to point out that you were a real lawyer. You were the GC of 2 publicly traded companies and Chief Compliance Officer at Campbell's Soup. Tell us a little bit about that and how you inched into the world of legal innovation and, of course, then ESG, which we'll get to.
Yeah, so I think you're exactly right, Joe. It's never too late, and I'm probably one of the best living, breathing examples of that. If you had asked me a year ago even, whether I thought I'd find myself running a paradigm-shifting practice within a big law firm, I would have violently disagreed with you. I would have said no chance. Why would a great firm like Paul Weiss want somebody like me? I'm in fact not practicing law in this role, and that's a unique feature of our ESG practice. I'm running, it's effectively a startup within a major law firm, and we're bringing the elements of data, analytics, content, and a more holistic approach to the practice. One of my mottos and what a value I live by is you should be open to everything and attached to nothing. And what I find with lawyers is they get stuck in lanes of travel and they believe that because they're in a prison of their own making that there's no way out, when in fact the key is right there for them. Sometimes the jail doors are left open. And so innovation is also a state of mind. And it doesn't have to be AI. It doesn't have to be world-breaking stuff. Some of the companies that I've worked with are remarkable innovation, and we're innovating right now in a traditional law firm. And so innovation is a state of mind. It's keeping current with what's relevant in business. What if you're a lawyer and you're helping advise a client and clients, what is it that they're concerned about? What are they thinking about for 18 months and 3 years and 5 years from now? What Wayne Gretzky used to say, you have to skate to where the puck's going to be, not where it's been. A lot of lawyers look in the rearview mirror and they determine that that's what my future is. And I've never believed in that. And I think you also have to be, if you're interested in doing something different, listen, there are lawyers who are very comfortable in the lanes of travel, and that's great. And they want to be an expert in one thing, and that's fine. That was not my personality. It didn't match me. And I found that also, Joe, that opportunities can be presented that seem like non-opportunities. So I've been offered or forced to do things in different roles. I'll give you an example. I was at Campbell Soup Company, as you mentioned, and this is back when the sentencing guidelines came out, and companies had to very quickly put together codes of conduct, compliance, and ethics functions. They didn't have them. And so my boss came into me one day, the general counsel, and he sort of dumped this pile of codes of conduct on my desk, and he said, "Congratulations, you're now our chief compliance officer, chief ethics officer." And at that time, I didn't know what the hell that was. And I said, "Well, what is that?" He goes, "I don't know. You're a smart guy. You'll figure it out." And I thought it was a terrible assignment at first. And what I learned is, from building for 46,000 employees, a global company operating in over 100 countries, building a compliance program from scratch was a remarkable thing that I have the experiences of traveling around the world, having to do these things in different languages, deal with different cultures, and actually implement something of this scale was amazing. And it has helped me throughout my career. I've used pieces of that information basically every week in what I do today. But if I had the attitude that was being imposed on me, or it wasn't fun, or wasn't interesting, I wouldn't have gotten many of the assignments that I've done. Some of them have been, things that weren't really exciting, but I've learned from everything. And lawyers are quite linear in how they think, and I've never been linear. It's not a direct path, and you have to be able to go and sometimes, by the way, fail at what you're doing, because that's part of innovation too. And so, sorry.
No, I was just going to say, I love the quote, "Be interested in everything and attached to nothing." I hope I got that right.
Yep.
But it reminds me a lot of, I don't know if anyone in the audience has read the book Shoe Dog, about the founding of Nike. The strategy they used in early days when they were trying to build rapidly a multi-billion-dollar shoe company was to hire lawyers and accountants, because the CEO figured, Phil Knight figured, lawyers at least know how to write and how to speak, and accountants at least know numbers, and they're smart and they know how to solve problems. And I completely agree with you. Far from being stuck in a lane, I think lawyers are some of the best problem solvers in the world, and can continue being great lawyers, which is a fantastic career, or can go into almost anything in a short matter of time. I come from a litigation background where you had to learn a new industry, in a matter of months. And then, speak to somebody or question somebody or depose somebody that has lived in that world their entire careers, and talk to them as a peer. I think that is phenomenal training for the uncertainty of startup world or technology or all the things. So I want to go back to ESG. You said, it's amazing that a big firm like Paul Weiss, I would say more than big firm, Paul Weiss is one of the world's phenomenal firms in any kind of metric you can look at. Profits per partner, the good you guys do in the world. I've been a big fan of the, some of the cases you've taken up to the Supreme Court pro bono. But you said you brought this idea to them. Is that correct? Or you founded this practice group?
I did found the practice group, but actually the idea brought itself to the table.
Wow.
You mentioned thought leadership, Joe, and you and I have collaborated on a bunch of these great roundtables. Well, one of those roundtables several years ago, when I was at Thomson Reuters with you, was hosted by Paul Weiss.
I remember.
At that time, the leadership of Paul Weiss came up to me after the session and said they really enjoyed the conversation. In fact, they thought it was a unique conversation and that we should stay in close collaboration together and we should work together on programs, and that I should bring to them ideas on themes that would be interesting to legal audiences. And so a couple of years later, after I left and I ran an AI company, leaving Thomson Reuters, a company called Fiscal Note, I ran the business side of it. And so there's an example: business leadership, legal background for a company focused on lawyers, government affairs. Fiscal Note owns CQ Roll Call, among other things. Mm-hmm. And so I'm at this company, I'm doing roundtables and realizing that these roundtables on ESG as it collides with the legal ecosystem is, my hypothesis was that lawyers were out of touch, and I was proven right. Lawyers were not owning it. It was being owned by heads of sustainability, human resources, all doing good jobs. But I knew that there was a major role for brilliant lawyers to play. So in January of this year, I approached the leadership and took them up on their offer. And I said, listen, I'd like to do this ESG series of discussions with your firm. And that conversation, an hour later, we had devised the practice that I am now running. And so I didn't come with any idea to run a practice, to start a practice, or do any of that. I came with the idea that there was a set of issues that lawyers were on the sidelines about, where clients needed help, and needed lawyering layered over business with technology, and that also law firms needed to devise a new way of approaching ESG. I look at ESG as back to the future lawyering. When I started practicing, clients needed rounded information. They wanted counsel. The profession has become so hyper-specialized that some lawyers have forgotten how to do that. They only give very discrete advice for very discrete questions. And I think that's a failing of the legal practice. And because how can you give advice in a vacuum? And so we had a very progressive leadership, as you mentioned. Paul Weiss is very well known for taking on very important racial and social justice issues and the like, a massive pro bono operation that's just a world class. And they offered me the opportunity that I couldn't refuse, an offer of a lifetime, which would be to not track my hours, to be a business leader of a legal practice, which I believe is the only one of its kind in the world. And that's what I do. So we bring together data science and analytics, technology, content, and wrap that with the amazing lawyers that Paul Weiss has.
Give our audience one really concrete example. So we all know the words sustainability, environmental, social governance.
Yeah.
But I think for a lot of people out there, it's like, what's one issue you and your team would grapple with and help the Paul Weiss lawyers engage with?
So a great example is diversity and inclusion. Mm-hmm. So, which is one of the, if not the hottest issue of the day. That's the S of ESG. So that's a major social issue. So companies left and right, including, if you saw this week, NASDAQ now is going to be mandating that boards for companies listed on NASDAQ are going to require diversity and inclusion metrics. They're going to have women and people of color on their boards.
Fantastic.
Now, it's a major advance. NASDAQ has over 3,000 companies on their exchange. The lawyering that goes with that is, first, we have to have policies and procedures. Nothing happens at a company without a policy or a procedure. So the lawyers document it. We need to have that not only as an initiative, but we need to make sure that the company has a blueprint with details of what that is going to mean for their company. It's not just throwing women and people of color on their board. They need to actually have a recruiting process. They need to invest. Companies are doing scholarships, fellowships. They're looking at minority and women-owned businesses in their supply chain. There's a whole cascade of work that needs to be documented. Nobody's better at documenting things than lawyers. So we help companies create those policies and procedures. Next, the thing about ESG, whether it's diversity and inclusion, whether it's Black Lives Matter, whether it's environmental, climate change, these kinds of things, there's no beginning, there's no end. when you run a company and you say, I'm going to have a sales number and an EBITDA number, those are finite. Those are specific things. In ESG, it's always progress against goals. You're never fully environmentally sound, you're never fully socially engaged, and you never have perfect governance.
Sure.
So what you need is mechanisms to track, measure, monitor, and report on your progress. Because if you can't measure it, it's not there, it's not real. So if you apply these policies and procedures, you need a tracking, measuring, and monitoring. So what the lawyers do is nobody's better than doing risk assessments and gap analysis at companies. Lawyers will then assess the company against their objective and make sure to identify gaps and then to figure out a remediation plan for those gaps. So we help companies do that. They address them. Here are the gaps. Here's what we need to do to document the issue. Here's what the change steps are necessary. And now we need to track those. And increasingly, Joe, ESG, these things are going to have to be reported. So there's going to be disclosures, securities disclosures. There's going to be disclosures to various government agencies, already are, but even more so. The Department of Labor, the FTC, antitrust issues, all these kinds of things need to have documentation and good lawyering. So the objective may be a corporate principle that is not a legally mandated principle, but everything around it is just like a legal requirement.
Absolutely.
So envision just the modern view of what's a company obligation and how do you document it and prove it to somebody that you did it.
And that kind of brings us to technology, which I want to make sure we touch on in the last 15 minutes. Technology is taking an ever larger piece of the practice of law. I would argue it will do nothing but expand the pie for lawyers and lawyer adjacent professionals. But there's no question that it's integrating itself more and more into our daily lives. Is there a large technological component to maintaining an ESG practice?
Enormous, Joe. And I'm, like you, a friend to technology, as is our firm. Not every lawyer, but you shouldn't be afraid of this because, for an example, if you use our diversity and inclusion example, there's no way that a lawyer manually, first of all, a client can't afford it, but there's no way possible for us to do the calculations that a machine can do in an eighth of a second. So, for example,
it should be done.
So I'll give you an example. NASDAQ is a technology company. NASDAQ has a variety, and we partnered with them. They have a variety of technology tools for board portals, for reporting of these informations, to do the director and officer questionnaires that are done to determine their backgrounds on ethnicity and gender, et cetera, and their compensation. There are companies like Equilar, who we also work with, is a terrific company that does all this data and analytics around who is on what board. So it's easy to say, I want more women and people of color on my board. Where do you find them? How do you know? Like, where are they? They don't just stand around on the streets and say, I'm a director ready for hire. You need data and you need technology to be able to find them. And that's using artificial intelligence. Listen, I've run 4 technology companies and I've worked for Thomson Reuters, which had a bunch of these technologies and content. There's no way that lawyers could do or should be doing many of these things manually. What they should be doing is being friends to it and better understanding it, getting under the hood of some of these technologies, and then do what lawyers should be doing that's not replaceable by technology. And that is judgment, using common sense, helping serve clients by being true conciliaries and advisors on the options that are available. Listen, technology is overpromised and underdelivered my whole career, and lawyers have been afraid of technology my whole career. I think it's time to do it now. Because if you're a practicing lawyer and you're not embracing technology and data and the quantification elements of it, especially in ESG, then you're doing a disservice to your client. And conversely, if you think that you can put the stuff on autopilot and in some technology black box, you're wrong there as well. You need both. You need guidance systems, which are the lawyers, to lean in and let the technology do what it does best. Sort through lots of data, serve up options, create forms that you shouldn't be replicating, bespoke. You should be able to do one-to-many of these things. I've worked with AI on contract lifecycle management, on a wide variety of things. You and I've worked together on a variety of these businesses. They're great tools. I mean, so I was the general counsel at Intralinks when it went public. Intralinks invented the virtual data room. Now it's a common thing, Box and Dropbox and all these things. It didn't exist in the 90s. And I remember lawyer resistance to that. I was an early adopter. My cousin actually started the company. And I remember everybody saying, Dave, you can't do that. We need to be in data. We need to sit in conference rooms and, and it's ridiculous.
You can still sit in conference rooms. I mean,
Yeah.
it's allowed, just not necessary.
Right. You could do other things in conference rooms, like have great meals. But the point being is that nobody would think of doing an M&A transaction today without using a data room. It's silly.
Right.
And so, but is the data room deciding on whether you should do the deal? No. The lawyers are deciding with the business people on what are the pros and cons of the deal, the risks and these kinds of things. So there's a hand in glove experience that makes perfect sense. There are 6 dozen of those things that the lawyers should be embracing.
Right. I mean, isn't the real issue scale? I think when lawyers see technology as a threat rather than as a promise, they're not envisioning the scale it can bring to their expertise. You can make a decision and have something automate that decision, 10 times, 1,000 times, 1,000,000 times, whether it's, redlining a contract or in litigation, finding the right evidence. I think if you can get through the concept that these technologies are really there to augment your intelligence and your learning and allow you to impact more people. Thus the quote, want to make $1 billion, help 1 billion people. The only way law is ever going to get away from that one-to-one practice, which is wonderful and very intimate and has value, but we all know does not serve the needs of the world. We're going to have to integrate technology into it, but it never takes away, like you said, that judgment and high touch at the top of the practice.
Yeah, and I think, listen, one of the fundamental challenges, I did a roundtable yesterday with NYU, it's Center on Race and Inequality. One of the fundamental problems that we need to address is legal education. Law schools are in the dark ages, and honestly, for $250,000 plus, to have not one single mandatory course on technology, data, and analytics, and to not have one mandatory course in any law school in this country on ESG is a disservice to the profession, and that's where it needs to start. So I'm spending a lot of time now with some of the top tier law schools, marrying with the business schools. So NYU and Stern, we're going to be doing a program with them in a couple of months. It has to change theirs as well, because I look at this at Paul Weiss, and we have some of the most brilliant people I've ever worked with blow my doors away in terms of their intelligence. They don't understand some of the basics, not because they can't, but because they never grew up in that. They were poli-sci majors or history majors like me. They go into law school, and law school today is like it was when I graduated 34 years ago. The curriculum is almost exactly the same. Now, there are a lot of great electives. I've been an adjunct in several schools and done this thing, but not a single mandatory course on the things we're talking about today. And that, to me, is criminal. And if I'm a parent, which I am, paying expensive tuition for these kids, and you get out of law school and you go into a law firm, and you're expecting at the law firm to learn about technology and systems, and forget it. It's a broken system at its roots.
Yeah, absolutely. But there's also the huge regulatory angle too, right? Like in most other industries, if there were, tens of millions, hundreds of millions of underserved people, I believe the free market would step in and find, solutions even with tiny slivers of profit margin to resolve those problems. But the way our regulatory system in the US is set up, anything where there is legal advice, the profits cannot be shared with non-lawyers. Therefore, you can't take any sort of legal business public, you can't raise public capital, and you can't do a lot of the things that, frankly, have solved a lot of problems in other areas of the economy. We see a lot of pushback there. Regulatory is one of the things I like to bring up in every one of these talks, because they are opening regulatory sandboxes. And I think it's worth noting and discussing that the U.S. is actually probably the most conservative, non-liberal legal system in the world at this point.
Absolutely. And it's interesting, Joe. It's a prison of our own making. So who's making the regulations? Lawyers. About lawyers, what lawyers can't do, these battles on advertising. And if you go to the UK, the 4 or 5 biggest law firms in the UK are not law firms anymore. The magic circle's been blown away. And That's not because the magic circle doesn't have great lawyers. It's because the large consulting firms have done an excellent job of moving the needle there. In the US, like you said, especially because it's such a state by state system, that it's arcane, and it should be free. They should be much freer to operate. But it is interesting, even within those confines, that law firms, and for example, are experimenting. They're investing in technology. They're incubating. I mean, Paul Weiss is investing in ESG. It's not technology per se, but it is. We are quantitative.
It's an alternative business model.
It's an alternative business model, and clients are loving it. Clients, they want this dynamic engagement with lawyers. I've done this polling at my roundtables. If you put a general counsel who wants advice on a series of business and legal and risk issues, and you ask them, do they want that advice from if they could get it, if they could get all that good advice from a law firm or from a consulting firm, where would they go? 100% of the time they'd go to the law firm.
Wow.
They really feel that they see the constraints on law firms, and then they have to go to these other places because law firms are constrained by their own and by these, as you mentioned, the regulations around it. But given a choice, and by the way, that doesn't mean that going to the law firm lawyer means that everything's done by the law firm. That's not what I'm saying. It means you need a quarterback. You need somebody who's actually going to, like, for example, in our practice, I'll bring in LexFusion. We'll bring in technology companies, but it should be quarterbacked by somebody who knows the entire ecosystem, not randomly in silos, which is how it works for a lot of companies. You and I remember when working in our prior companies, when the clients would come to us directly, circumnavigating the law firms, and then realize, we need the lawyers here, and it was never good. It was never. And so why would those worlds be artificially siloed? It should be together. And I think part of the change that's happening, and one of the reasons why ESG is such an exciting area for lawyers, and I really recommend lawyers to think about it. It's going to be the giant practice of the future. It's not my opinion. Since we announced our practice earlier this year, there have been at least 20 major law firms that have followed suit. You're going to see 50, 100 of them. And why is that? Because the elements of ESG have about 80% traditional lawyering and 20% new dynamic advice. And that dynamic advice is quantitative with data and analytics, the frameworks, international frameworks, the metrics, the KPIs that are involved in ESG are non-lawyers. But as I mentioned earlier, you have to tether it with lawyering. And so that's the combination. It's a modern way, and you're going to see that more and more.
So we only have 4 minutes left. I wanted to end with something a little bit fun. Again, we talked about you throw some of the most fantastic roundtables. I know it's closed doors, so I might be pushing the envelope here a little bit. But who are some of the most fascinating people you've met through that process? And what has blown your mind? What have you learned through getting these people into these closed door sessions?
Well,
sorry, putting you on the spot. I'm the host.
Yeah, that's okay. I've met so many amazing people. I'll tell you what, Joe, it's not the celebrities. I've worked with amazing, so here at my firm, we have some of the most remarkable public servants that I've ever known. Jay Johnson and Loretta Lynch work at Paul Weiss. These people are unbelievable. So just learning from them and listening at these sessions is a miracle to me. The fact that a poor kid from the other side of the tracks on Long Island is able to work with these luminaries is a gift every day. But what I've learned mostly is from people, when you get off the record with general counsels, you learn things. Why do we have 3 times the addiction rate, suicide rate, divorce rate in the world? Why are we the loneliest profession? It's a very stressful world. And when you get a chance to let your hair down and I don't have any hair, but if you let your hair, those who have it, you have the ability for, let's say, an hour and a half, 2 hours to commiserate, to de-stress with your colleagues. When they do that and they relax and they're comfortable with being open and vulnerable, that's when the magic happens at these sessions. And I think, Joe, you attended one of the Me Too roundtables we did. We did a series of 8 of them. These were moving. Everybody, male, female, whatever your gender, whatever your race, whatever your background, has some story about power and control. And the stories, we had general counsels who literally were in tears, telling their personal stories. And I learned so much from just being in the presence of these really amazing human beings. And it's an honor and a privilege to be able to do that.
Fantastic. Dave, thank you so much for joining us. Everybody, Dave, Chief Sustainability, Environmental, Social, and Governance Officer at the phenomenal firm Paul Weiss. It is a bit of a mouthful. I see why you went with ESG. That's it for Future Law this week. I will see you next Friday over lunch. Have a great weekend.
Thanks, Joe. Everybody have a great weekend. Thank you.